Good afternoon, superintendents and guests. I want to welcome you to the Superintendent Webcast, Tuesday, May 19th. Thank you for joining us today. We have a packed agenda today. I know we do every week, but particularly this week, have a lot to go over. You can see there from the invite all of the items that we're going to have a communications update, and then also want to make sure if you take nothing else out of this webinar webcast, make sure you are forwarding to your district and your constituencies the information about the class of 2020 tribute that Tony will go over. And then, of course, we're going to spend a great deal of time today on the guidance for reopening schools. We have an update on the completion of industry certifications and dual credit lab courses. Want to thank KCTCS, CPE, as well as KIA for their cooperation, and you'll hear about some of those items that will assist districts and students in those efforts. And then, of course, accessing ESSER funds, and then also special education related issues to reopening. And then, of course, we will devote a large amount of time to answering questions. You can do that by going to the gosoapbox.com. And the access code is KDE COVID. And when we get to the question, we will take questions along with the subject matter as they're coming in, and then we'll obviously close out with a question answer period. But we will begin the question answer period by catching up on some questions that we were unable to answer on the last two webcasts. We have answers for those. In case you haven't seen those in the Q&A document, we will begin with those and then keep going through that document. So, in the interest of time, Tony, I'll turn it over to you for a communications update.
I'm just going to continue to share the screen for the PowerPoint. And once again, I just want to thank everyone for sending in all of your photos over the last, I guess it's the month. I asked you at the beginning of May to get those pictures turned in to us. And the result is going to be this 1 hour special that the Department of Education, in partnership with the Kentucky Workforce and Education Development Cabinet, has also been working together on a video that's being produced by Megan in our, shout out to Megan in OET office, and it's being put together right now. It is going to feature a number of commencement addresses from several elected and appointed officials across the state, including Governor Beshear, Representative Huff, and Senator Max Wise, and then Kevin, of course, and then State Board Chair Lou Young, and several others. And then we are also very, very pleased and very honored when we reached out to a few Kentucky musical artists, J.D. Shelburne and Lincoln Bridge, as well as the Kentucky State Choir, that they did not hesitate and said, yes, what can we do to help? And so we're very, very excited that we were able to pull this together. And the result will be this hour-long special that we will stream on a special KDE Class of 2020 YouTube channel. It will air this Saturday at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Time. You all can share that stream on your social media channels. If you have any questions on how you want to do that, or if I have any media listening that would be interested in sharing on your channels, please give me a call or shoot me an email, and I can share that with you. I also understand that the governor and lieutenant governor and as well as other people who are featured are going to be streaming on their channels as well. So I really, really appreciate the collaboration and help in really providing this help to give an appropriate tribute to our seniors. All right, and then of course it'll be sorry, I apologize there. My dog is barking in the background. It'll be hosted by Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman. And like I said, if you have any questions on that, give me an email on that. The other thing I wanted to mention to you
Tony,
is,
while you're dealing with Fido there, I would like to just thank you
give me
and
1 second.
Also the Lieutenant Governor's Communication Office, JT, and others. This is Kentucky's version of the event that was presented nationally on Saturday night, which, frankly, to see the Kentucky content, of course, you had to go online, but my preference would have been that national ceremony had a little bit more representation of some of Kentucky and its art and its artists. But this is our time to do that. And we originally approached a television entity to do this, and they were unable to do it for various reasons. And I just thought it would be the end of it. And Tony, Lieutenant Governor, and the communications office just basically wouldn't take no for an answer, and that's the result that you will see Saturday night. And it is truly going to be a tribute to the students, because while the individuals will be talking and giving commencement addresses, you'll be seeing pictures, and the focus will be on the students. So I'm really looking forward to it, and a lot of work and effort has gone into this. Megan, particularly at KDE, took up the mantle on this to put this together. No pressure, Megan. So I would just want to thank you all for doing this. I think it'll mean a lot to the students.
Yeah, we had, just to give you an idea, there was over 2,000 photos that were submitted through the Google Drive, all from the superintendents and from high school principals, from about 215 different individual points. And so we are including at least 5, if not more, depending on the quality. We had sometimes some of the quality was not as great for video from each school. So I'm really, really happy with the representation from each of your school districts, and very excited for you to see the final product. The next item is, we just wanted to reiterate again that we are searching for a new education commissioner. And again, this is very similar to what we had mentioned to you last week, and that we are inviting applications and nominations, and both of those links on the PowerPoint are clickable. So you can look at the brochure, and you can look at what we're looking for in our next commissioner, and you can submit materials. The deadline for, the best for first consideration is May 31st. So if Kevin, if you want to add anything to that, but I just want to continue to put this into our weekly webcast, so that in case you know of somebody that would be interested in putting their name in, or you think that they would be a great commissioner for our students and for our Commonwealth, please, please, please go ahead and get with our search firm, Greenwood and Asher, and let them know, so that we can get them to be part of this process.
The only thing I would add, Tony, is that nomination process is not just for show. The nomination process actually resulted in Dr. Pruitt coming to us. That's how he became a candidate. So that is a viable way for someone to become the Commissioner of Education, is through the nomination process, not just through someone that the search committee finds or the search firm finds out there. So please take advantage of that. Superintendents, other school district leaders, you're best positioned to know within the state, and others that you may have come into contact with nationally that might be great candidates. So please take advantage of that. Okay.
And then with that, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the guidance for reopening schools. And I will hand the PowerPoint, or I will guide the PowerPoint, but hand this part over to Dr. Foster and Kay Kennedy.
Great, thank you, Tony. We will dive a little deeper into the guidance that was released last Friday. Let me share my screen quickly, and I will show you a couple of things. If you go to our webpage and go to the COVID-19 page, you will see that currently in the FAQ box, the guidance is listed there. And in the next few days, there will be another box here that says reopening. And so the current guidance and any additional guidance will be posted in that box. So I'm sure Tony will send something out when that is up and running, but I just wanted to let you know where to look for in the future. Okay, Tony, can you put the slides back up? Great. So if you've been through the guidance, you will see there are 5 things that we identified early on that as a district team that you all needed to make sure that you were working on with your district reopening team. We talked last week about the fact that you needed to work with your local public health and that you needed to make sure that you had a district health coordinator as part of that reopening team. And so the 5 areas that are outlined are identifying a healthy at work officer there in your district, establish a healthy at work communications plan, educate and train your employees, establish contact training protocols, and establish a calendar, enrollment, and attendance guidelines. Next slide, please. As you can see in the guidance, we referenced the 3 reopening models that the governor mentioned to us 2 weeks ago, the early opening, the traditional opening, and the late opening. And keep in mind, all 3 of these are just suggestions and part of the guidance. None of these are required, but these are 3 different types of openings around the timeline that you can think about with your district reopening team. Next slide, please. Intermittent closures.
Kelly, if I could comment while we're talking about those, I just want to reiterate what you just said. There's been a lot of confusion out there about whether or not districts were required to open early. I just want to reiterate to you, when the governor suggested that and we agreed and also provided that to you through this guidance, that is to just tell you that if you want to open early, and you are able to open early and meet the guidelines that are going to continue to come out from public health, that is okay to open school in late July during this time and during a pandemic, if that were to be permitted based on what the virus is doing, in anticipation that there could be a fall spike. We also know that may not work for your community, or we're hearing obviously there's a lot of exhaustion out there. There's going to be a lot of heavy lifting that has to be done over the summer to get ready to open no matter when you open. And you just may not be logistically able to get ready to open in late July or early August. We understand that. The benefit to opening early would be that you get some days in potentially if there were a spike and that would require later closing. So that's why that was mentioned. The governor wanted to make sure that districts could be thinking in various different terms because it is going to be a different school year. And then obviously, it's okay to plan to open late as well. And the actual virus conditions, even if you plan for a traditional opening, it may end up requiring that we open our doors later than we expected. So the models were designed to get you thinking about those options, to know that it's okay. We've got your back if you want to open early. We've also got your back if you think it's best in your district to open after Labor Day. So I wanted to provide that context for you, particularly since those options were mentioned in a public way through the governor's press conferences and other venues.
Thank you, Kevin. Another piece in the guidance that you will see talks about intermittent closures. There is a chance all of this happened very quickly, and I believe most schools closed on March the 16th. So that is something that your district reopening team needs to think about. Do you all have a plan in place if there is a rapid spike sometime this fall and you all have to go ahead and close in the middle of the fall semester? Next slide, please. Part of the framework of the guidance are around 4 buckets, and we mentioned these last week. Thinking about health and safety for all, maintaining quality teaching and learning, supporting exceptional learners, and school and district operations. And as I've mentioned before, this guidance is a cross-agency piece of guidance, and originally there were about 500 questions for you all to think about, and we were able to get those down to around 100. So these are the 4 areas that you all will need to be focusing on when you are thinking about at the local level reopening your schools either late summer or early fall. Next slide, please. So phase 2. As I mentioned at the beginning on the website, you will see additional guidance pieces being posted as those are completed. And of course, we will share those through the Monday email as well as other superintendent webcast. But the piece of guidance that you have now has poses the questions to you that the district leadership team should think about, and also any risk factors around those questions. What we will do moving forward is that the guidance that we release will be around specific topics and will be a deeper dive. So the first one that we'll probably release will be dealing with social and emotional learning. We will also have a piece of guidance around alternative learning experiences, health and safety considerations. So these are three that we are working on currently, but I would expect that guidance will be coming out throughout the summer. Kay Kennedy is also on the call with us today, or excuse me, the webcast. And Kay has been working very closely with public health. And I'd like to give Kay an opportunity to give you an update on where they are with their guidance and when we should expect to see it. Kay?
Thank you, Kelly. The guidance that is forthcoming from the Department for Public Health has to go through several levels of approval. And from the time that we have discussion to when we actually see the document varies, just like it does with guidance that comes from the Department of Education. But today I have seen where the Department for Public Health has communicated to local health departments guidance related to the process for actually cleaning and sanitizing school buildings. So we will have that link up hopefully just as soon as our COVID page gets updated, we can add that link on the cleaning and sanitizing of school buildings. So that would be helpful for you to know what the expectation is there. We're also working with the Department for Public Health. Angie McDonald, our state school nurse, is working with other nurse practitioners on developing protocols around how you conduct entry into the building in terms of temperature taking, in terms of health questionnaires. What do you do when a student or a staff member presents with symptoms at the door, and how we can all contribute to the contact tracing that is going to have to take place if we have positive cases in the school building. So we are working very closely with the Department for Public Health, and we will link to the guidance that they provide. So you have one place to have the authoritative source. And we will also include anything that Department for Public Health recommends from CDC. And we are including guidance from national organizations around school health, transportation, other features in the operational area that will be helpful to you. So as soon as those become available to us, we'll add the links, and those will be available for you. Kelly, back to you.
All right, I think that takes care of our presentation at this point. We will be glad to entertain any questions. I will also say, keep in mind, this is guidance. Nothing that is suggested in the guidance is required. And this first document is really something for you to sit down with your district reopening team and look at those guiding questions and try to determine what is going to work in your individual district. Tony, I
do
think
we
we're
have
ready
any?
for.
Yeah, I was just
Well,
going to.
did
Tony,
you want
do we
to
have any
go?
questions
Well,
related to
say,
this area?
Do you want to go back to the? I mean, there's several questions that were left unanswered last week that are related to this. Do you want? How do you want to go forward with this?
Why don't we just move on through the agenda, unless there's some that pop right out, and then we'll just take them all at the end.
That's what I was thinking. Okay, so we'll just keep going, and then we'll just answer all the questions at the end.
So David Horstman is up next with update on the completion of industry certs and dual credit lab-based courses. David?
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. I know this has been a hot topic in districts from parents and all, so we're happy to be able to share some beginning processes to start finalizing some of our students in these lab-based courses. So if we could go to the first slide, please. As Kevin said earlier, we've been working with our partners, that being Dr. Box from KCTCS and Dr. Thompson from the Council on Post-Secondary Ed, as well as Eugene Hutchins from KIA. And these are all tied together for this process that we're about to talk about. So beginning sometime this week and June 30th, the KCTCS facilities have been notified by the CPE that the governor's authorized in-person coursework for these students to resume under the conditions of the governor's Healthy at Work reopening protocols, and then any industry-specific guidance that would be issued by the governor's office for those particular programs. The students who return for these opportunities will be provided with the appropriate personal protective equipment. At this point, we believe that being face masks, some of the other things for the heavier type of programming like welding. Most of those students already have those in their own programs, but that'll be on a case-by-case basis moving forward. But in order to do this, we want to make sure that the student wants to do this and there's willingness for the student and the parent. If the students are under 18, we would want parent guardian approval to participate in this on the KCTCS campus. That's where this is happening. And I think some of those are opening this week. If the student is 18 or older, we're requesting that the student at least give notice to the parent and guardian that this is something that we would be, that they'll be involved in, considering the circumstances. And this time and our priority here now is just for this class of 2020 seniors who we've talked about that really have taken it on the chin this year. And the other institutions, if there are private institutions or others that are involved, those policies are still to be determined. So if we could go to the next slide, please. The next slide is going to be talking about the requirements for students that would return to secondary facilities. So we're working right now. I've got a group of principals from area technology centers and locally operated technology centers and some leadership staff here at Office of Career and Technical Education, working on plans as to how we can approach offering this opportunity, hopefully by the end of June. And again, the focus on this is going to be those 1920 graduating seniors and would be the first priority. So in order for this to happen, the Department of Education will have to let districts and ATCs know that the governor has authorized in-person coursework for these students to resume. And again, they will be following the governor's Healthy at Work reopening protocols. And then again, any applicable industry-specific guidance that's issued by the office of the governor. The students who return for these assessments and dual credit opportunities are provided with personal protective equipment if they don't have it, and the school district or ATC will, and probably with ATCs, it'll be hand in hand with the district. We'll coordinate with the local DPH representatives concerning these reopening protocols and the plan. And again, we want to make sure this is on a request. It's not mandatory. If the student wants to do it and the parent's on board, and if they're 18 and over, they don't need parents' permission. We'd like them to let them know. If they're under 18, we have a waiver that can be signed if they're doing it at the college, and we'll have a permission slip for those doing at the secondary facilities. If we could go to the next slide, please. This next topic is one of the more complicated being the Medicaid nurse aide. And we wanted to try to make sure there's opportunities for those folks, because this gets kids right into jobs as soon as they graduate. And the industry is in need of more M&A certified folks. So this is controlled by the Department of Medicaid Services and operated through the Kentucky Community and Technical College system. As part of this process of being certified as a state registered nurse aide, there's a requirement of 6 hours of supervised clinical experience that usually takes place in a local nursing home. But with the COVID-19 and all the issues around that in nursing homes, DMS has waived that requirement, and it allowed now to happen within a hospital or even a simulated clinical setting. So if one of those two methods are chosen, if these hours are completed within the hospital facility, the following conditions have to be met by the school district or the ATC. And this is the same as the process has always been, and that's to obtain evidence of a signed M&A facilities agreement and collect evidence of students' willingness and the parent and guardian approving of this to happen. Again, 18 and over, please notify. 18 under 18, we'll need the parent's permission. And if we could go to the next slide, please. All right, a couple of things we want to make sure people understand about dual credit specifics. Now, first, for seniors, we've got a document that we're working on and the guidance that'll be coming out later today after this presentation to you about the lab-based dual credit completion guidance. And but each high school should be following up with their seniors directly who are impacted. And the student, should the student wish to take advantage of the course completion opportunity, the guidelines should be followed that we're going to be sending out. If the student decides not to complete the course, the student then should be withdrawn from the course. And again, KDE's been working with KIA, CPE, and KCTCS regarding how this impacts students on their out-of-pocket tuition payments, especially those non-scholarship students, how it impacts their future financial aid. So they should be thoughtful about what they're doing before they withdraw to make sure they understand all the issues. If we could have the next slide, please. When we talk about this, these specifics for underclassmen enrolled in these lab-based dual credit courses within the 2019-20 year that were not completed, they will be actually getting an in-progress or an IP with the college, and we'll have them input an incomplete grade into Infinite Campus for the time being. Then when they return later in the summer or the fall of 2020, they'll have until December 2020 to complete this lab-based coursework. Now, should a student wish to withdraw completely from the course, if their parents don't feel comfortable about them being out and in this environment or for whatever reason, it's advised, KDE is working closely again with KIA, CPE, and KCTCS to determine impacts on the out-of-pocket tuition payments for non-scholarship students. Next slide, please. But for those students, we want you to know that the current impact of the dual credit course withdrawals, now these are the ones that are on scholarship, not the ones that have paid their own. Provisions within House Bill 352, 2020, that's our budget bill, protects the students from loss or reduction of their dual credit scholarship funds from the spring 2020 semester due to the inability to complete due to the COVID-19. And again, there's no such provisions for those who withdraw from non-scholarship dual credit. Right now, I think there's discussions going on. That'll be something that'll be decided by the individual colleges. But at any rate, a withdrawal from a dual credit course due to COVID-19 will result in a W on the student's official post-secondary transcript. And underclassmen who withdraw from the dual credit scholarship will be allowed to retake the course again, utilizing the future dual credit scholarships. And I think our next slide is about some contact information. If you have questions beyond what we do today, you can call our office. Myself or Leslie Slaughter, Kylie Whitaker, be glad to help you with any questions you have.
Thank you, David. Next, we have Associate Commissioner Robin Kinney on the issue of accessing ESSER funds. And as a reminder, if you have any questions for David on the previous presentation, we are going to be taking those questions at the end. Feel free to go to the Go Soapbox. The access code is KDE COVID.
Thank you, Kevin. And Tony, if you can go to the next slide, please. I feel like we've been talking about the CARES Act for so long now that I could probably just turn over my online to any one of the superintendents out there, and they could probably spit back how much we're receiving and its uses. But repetition is powerful. It helps us to learn a little bit more each time and make sure that we all have a common understanding of what's going on. Of course, the CARES Act, we will be drawing from two pots of money, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, and that's what I'm going to talk about more today. Out of that $193 million that Kentucky will be receiving, about 90% of that coming to school districts. It's allocated per Title I Part 8 formula, approximately 83%. And we've had a little bit of confusion. So even though right now you can quickly go to our KDE website and it shows you your allocation, because we've already done those numbers, we've ran those calculations for you. You can go out there and see exactly how much you are going to receive. There was a little bit of confusion on this 83% because we had some districts saying, wait a minute, that's not really 83% of what I receive. So you have to go off your original allocation, not any amounts that you may have moved into Title I. So that's where I think a little bit of that confusion, but you can quickly go out and look at exactly your allocation now. It is out on the KDE website. Again, for the ESSER funds, broad flexibility in uses. And the GEARS fund, of course, we talked about last week, that $43 million allocated to Kentucky, with the governor reserving $30 million of that for K-12. Next slide, please. So we have talked about both of those funds. ESSER and GEAR will be awarded using the Title I Part A formula. We've asked districts, superintendents to complete assurance documents in GMAP. And I can report to you as of about noon today, we had about 90 assurances that had already been submitted to the department through GMAP. That is a combination of both ESSER and GEAR funds assurances, since there are separate assurances for each one. And after those submissions are received and processed, districts may request funds through the federal cash request process, which your finance officers are very familiar with. Also, as a reminder, those funding matrices are available on our KDE website at the location listed on the slide. So we've just added columns for each of the CARES funds for ESSER and one for GEARS, and that will help you as you're trying to think about your expenditure process. And this does go back, eligible expenditures can go back to March 13th of 2020. Next slide, please. This is our laundry list, I guess, of what you can spend your ESSER funds for. Any activity authorized by ESEA, IDEA, American Families Literacy, Perkins, or McKinney-Vento to start off with. Remember, these are funds that are on top of funds that you typically receive for those programs. Or you can use these funds for lots of other things that school districts may be incurring costs, which are more specific to the situation we find ourselves related to the coronavirus. And I'm not going to go through those one by one. You can see those listed on your slide. And I think we even continue on to the next slide. Tony, if you could go ahead and go into the next slide to have those. And this is not all inclusive. So there may be other things that you think of. Again, as we've talked throughout our presentations today, these are just examples of some things that you could choose to spend your funds on. I will tell you that as we've talked about ESSER and GEAR, and we've presented to lots of the commissioners' advisory groups on the funds, the availability, and what they can be used for, we are finding that there's lots of interest in the funds. So we encourage you to have those conversations at your local school districts, with your local board, of course, and also with other interested parties, your staff, and certain constituent groups that might be interested in learning more about how you intend on spending the funds that are coming your way. Next slide, please. Reporting requirements, we've talked about this before. Districts will submit quarterly CDIP reports. Again, you're very familiar with that. I do highlight those Munis project numbers that are on this slide because we had started out with different project numbers and we had to change those. So if any of your finance officers have any questions about that, please ask them to circle back to the district support services here at KDE and they'll be happy to help you. The quarterly deadlines are listed there again. And again, as we talked about with GEARS, we're not asking you to do a budget per se, but we will be requesting that you complete a spending plan template by June 30th, 2020, which basically indicates your intentions of the expenditure of dollars. If you decide that once you start out with a spending plan and you decide that's not the best way for you to proceed, that's okay. But we will ask you to do an annual report that's actually going to reflect exactly how your funds were expended since the award was made. So again, that snapshot, that spending plan template in GMAP by June 30th is really just an expression of your intentions at that point in time. And as always, if we receive additional reporting requirements from the USED, we'll have to pass those along to you. Next slide, please. Of course, you can always contact me or Charlie Harmon, the budget director. I do want to make you aware that the guidance document for ESSER will be released later today, I believe is our goal, later today after the webcast. That just like we did the GEARS document after the webcast last week, we'll be releasing that ESSER guidance to you. Again, it is guidance only. It's to really share thoughts for consideration, but it is not all inclusive. And of course, districts have great flexibility on the use of the ESSER funds, just like the GEARS money. So that's all the presentation I have for today, and we look forward to continue to work with you as dispersed funds. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Robin. Next up, we have a discussion of considerations for reopening for special education presented by Associate Commissioner Greta Hilton, Sylvia Starkey, and Veronica Sullivan.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Commissioner. As districts begin to work through the decisions around reopening and you're examining the reopening guidance, there are a few things we wanted to draw your attention back to as you think about what could potentially be some of the most vulnerable students within the district. So if you haven't already had conversations with your director of special education or special education chief or coordinators or whomever that may be in your district, we would strongly encourage you to do that, because as you work through the guidance and work through some of these questions, we want to ensure, first and foremost, that students with disabilities have equity and access. So that our students with disabilities are afforded the same opportunities as all students who don't have disabilities. And in thinking about that, there may be situations in which schools reopen, but maybe medically fragile students are, it may not be the least restrictive environment for certain students that have significant medical concerns. It could be that students need face-to-face instruction instead of a virtual environment. Whatever that decision is, as schools reopen, it's important for the Admissions and Release Committee, or the ARC team, to be making decisions around the least restrictive environment for every student as you move through those decisions. Obviously, if we stay in a virtual learning situation, one of the big questions that we've been asked in my office is this a change of placement for the IEP? And this is not a change of placement, it's a change of setting that occurred due to the pandemic. It wasn't a change of placement due to individual students' needs. So if things continue as they are for an extended period of time, there's no reason to have numerous ARC meetings to document that that there's a change of placement, because it's simply a change of setting. But as we reopen and the various scenarios are in play, be it virtual or a hybrid model or face-to-face, then it may be an opportunity for ARCs to come together and determine the least restrictive environment. Probably the most asked question across the nation right now in the special education arena is the question around compensatory education. And there seems to be a misconception out there that it has to be one or the other, that all students with IEPs should be afforded vast amounts of compensatory education, or no students with IEPs should receive any compensatory education, with the argument behind that being that that the district did not fail to implement FAPE, but rather the pandemic resulted in the denial of FAPE. And we would say that the truth is somewhere in the middle. It should be an individual decision. The ARC should be making those decisions. And way back when we first went to remote learning, one of the first things that we advise districts is to document the amount of services provided as well as the amount of services missed. And the reason for that is this situation right here is because if services are missed and they're unable to be provided due to the pandemic, and an example of this might be, orientation and mobility. It's very difficult to provide an O&M service in a virtual setting. So if that service was not provided, then the district has the responsibility of convening an ARC meeting to determine the amount of minutes that were missed and providing those through a compensatory education manner. We have received lots of questions around could this just occur through an extended school year type of service? And the short answer, basic answer to that is no, because ESY and compensatory education are very different. My staff currently are working on guidance and doing a great job. We hope to get that out within the next week around the differences between ESY and Comp Ed. There's actually a Sixth Circuit decision that came out of Kenton County several years ago that specifies compensatory education being the recoupment and of skills already taught. So in short, and I'm oversimplifying this, but ESY would occur when a student has recoupment and regression issues for skills that have been taught. Compensatory education would occur if skills weren't taught or denial of FAPE occurred. And in thinking about that, again, the argument against compensatory education and for this thought around what some refer to as unfinished learning or interrupted learning as a result of the pandemic, it's important to think about the denial of FAPE as obviously if students did not have instruction, their needs didn't change as a result of the pandemic. So it's important to really think through that. Look at the data. If students were provided the instruction in a comparable alternate form and continued to make progress in light of the pandemic, then that student may not be entitled to compensatory education. But again, the ARC should make these decisions. And I realize it's going to be a heavy lift as districts go back and they're having these ARC meetings in light of everything else that you've got on your plates. So the recommendation that we're providing is for directors of special education and coordinators and other leaders in the special education field to really be working with those case managers to prioritize the needs of ARC. So again, students who have not had services, that would bubble up to be, you know, those kids at the forefront for ARC meetings, compensatory education, while those who may continue to make progress would be maybe the second round of ARC meetings. So again, that comes into the bullets that are on the slide that you can see around progress monitoring and data analysis. Being able to have some type of assessment, for lack of a better word, to determine, you know, if there were regression and what extended school year services you might need to provide. And it's also important to note that ESY and Comp Ed can occur simultaneously. They are not the same thing, and both can be in play at the same time. And then lastly, one of the things to really think about is emergency contingency planning. This is something that, quite frankly, I don't think really any states have done a really good job with, and it's allowable under the IDEA, and we probably, looking back, should have been providing some additional resources on how to implement emergency contingency plans in case there were, you know, a pandemic. But unfortunately, that's just not some of the things that we were thinking about, since this comes around, you know, every 100 years or so. So, however, it is something we're thinking about in the future, and we would advise districts to really think about, in the event that there's a resurgence in the fall, or we face something else of this nature that changes the setting for students, then what does the IEP say about the contingency plan? What does remote instruction look like for each individual student? And so as you go back and have these ARC meetings, my recommendation would be to ensure that discussions are happening for all of those components in one meeting, because I think it will help with the, you know, as far as the amount of time that you have to invest into meetings for districts and parents alike. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides really are just simply questions to consider, and I won't go through all of those, but these are the high points, and they are not an exhaustive list of questions that you will be thinking about when thinking about students with disabilities. But, you know, some of the most important questions: how will you enforce social distancing in all special education environments, including, you know, students who may be medically fragile or who may need one-to-one assistance or supervision? And then thinking about students also with extreme behavior concerns. I mean, how do you ensure equity and access for these kids while also ensuring that their health and safety is paramount? Next slide, please. And again, this is just additional questions to consider. If students are not present, then how do you continue to provide FAPE? Again, that goes back to the contingency planning. So just some list of hot topic questions for you to think about while you're planning. And on our OCL webpage, there's several national, as well as Kentucky, as well as office specific resources, and a list of frequently asked questions for specific for students with disabilities. Next slide, please. That's what I was thinking. That's all.
That was it. Yeah, there was another one with instructional resources.
Thank you.
All right, Tony, I think we're ready to start with questions. I'm going to ask that you start. I believe you have the list of those that we were not able to answer over the last 2 webcasts. If you could start with those, and then we'll get into the new questions after that. You're muted.
Now you can hear me. Okay. So we'll start with the first question, which was regarding NTI days for the 2021 school year. Do we have a beginning number that we would be allotted, or would we take in 10-day chunks similar to this year? That was the question. The answer that we have come up with is an approved NTI application for 2021 gives the district the opportunity to seek approval for up to 10 NTI days per KRS 15807 in parentheses 9. The General Assembly or governor will have to extend the number of days, and neither has done so as of today. The next question that we had,
Tony, I'll just add that obviously in the atmosphere that we're going to be operating under in the fall, and we'll still likely be under, my guess, some type of an emergency order or declaration, and under a global pandemic, that I believe we will see obviously some flexibilities there through the governor's authority, and or when the General Assembly comes back in January, to ensure that we're able to get you those NTI days as you may need them in the fall semester. So the answer that was given is factually and legally correct. What I'm telling you is I believe we can act in good faith in the future, knowing for this fall semester that there is a strong likelihood you're going to be using NTI days, and it's possible you could go beyond 10 in the fall, which has probably never ever happened before.
Okay, our next question is, when will we receive information to share with parents about PEBT? CHFS and KDE are awaiting approval of the state plan from USDA and further guidance, which I believe Robin can maybe be able to provide an update for this. I think that might actually be coming this week. But our intent is to provide the PEBT information for schools to utilize and to share with parents as soon as the USDA approval is received. Robin, did you want to elaborate on that? Because I did see a question on that in the soapbox as well.
Sure, I'll jump in for just a minute. We are, I would say, cautiously optimistic that that state plan will be approved this week. I know that this Division of School and Community Nutrition from my office will be hosting a call with food service directors on Thursday of this week. So we hope to have updated information at that time that we can share. And we're going to also provide additional information at the superintendent's call on Tuesday next week on May 26th. So we'll have the details of PEBT and how students and families can access those funds on Tuesday, May 26th.
Okay. All right, the next question that we had marked from last week is, are school boards allowed to meet in person, or should we continue with virtual meetings? And the answer to that question that we've come up with is school districts should communicate with local public health officials regarding the advisability of in-person meetings. Virtual meetings are permitted under the Open Meetings Act, and districts are not required to make an in-person location available for public attendance during the state of emergency. If school boards conduct in-person meetings, they should comply with all public health requirements. Right, the next question. Many districts are struggling with hiring processes, particularly the fingerprint requirement for background checks for new hires. This must be done in person. Do you have any advice or thoughts? The answer to this is, with in-person restrictions easing, school districts should check with their local law enforcement agencies or officials to determine an acceptable, safe process for collecting fingerprints. The next question, any chance that we can do some form of summer school for students in very small numbers, especially for CTE certification completion? Guidance will be published by KDE Octest the week of May 18th regarding conditions that must be met before a secondary student can return to either a secondary or post-secondary campus over the summer months to continue industry certifications, assessments, and lab-based dual credit coursework. And then, of course, we just discussed this on the webcast. I don't know if there was any more that David wanted to add to that. Are we good? Okay.
Sorry, I was talking. I had. We're ready to begin with the offers at the KCTCS campuses, which have been approved to be opened. And as soon as we move to that level in the local districts and ATCs, we'll let everybody know.
Okay, the next question that we have is, are you considering that if we start schools with limited students, that would indicate it is not a totally safe environment yet, and parents would most likely not send their children back to school? And we are currently working on guidance that is being drafted, and we will release that soon. If we do alternating days for students, how would we count that? NTI for every other day? Is there a max of NTI in this scenario? And the answer to that is these scenarios are being worked out, and we have no decisions or recommendations yet.
Tony, if you could go back to the previous question about the students that, about the environment not being completely safe.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the guidance document that was just issued talks about the, and I forget what we call it. It was pioneered, or I first learned of it through Boyle County Superintendent, about being able to provide instruction through virtual means to students or families that don't feel comfortable sending their students back into the school environment, and then conducting in-person classes using social distancing and all the other requirements from public health in the school building. Kelly, can you comment, or Kay, on that? Because I believe that question, that directly answers that question.
Yes, I also think Robin Kinney might want to join in on the conversation, because I know we had a small group meeting yesterday about attendance issues. And if you have some students coming on day A and some on day B, or some students doing virtual at home and other students being on site, Robin, do you want to share some thoughts on that?
Sure. We've convened a couple of groups at the department to try to talk about our current way that we look at attendance from both instructional purposes as well as funding purposes. And I think we already know that the way that we enter school in the fall and throughout the year next year may look very different than what we are accustomed to. So the challenge is trying to figure out a way that we can make sure that instruction is being provided, that students are receiving the benefit of educational services, that we are counting those students appropriately, and that we correspond funding to that. And so this is one of those that I don't have an answer to. I will tell you, we're thinking of lots of different options or different ways of looking at that. And I would actually welcome suggestions from superintendents. I think there's a couple things we have to keep in mind, because we do have a budget that has already been passed by the General Assembly to date, and it's kind of what we have, the funding that we have to work with. We've heard some suggestions throughout the calls about maybe going to a membership model. So that is something that we have been discussing. We've been discussing the value of having at least some level of certainty or some level of so that you can have expectations, again, for planning purposes, if you choose any one of these different models, because you don't want to pick a model and then, you're finding out that the funding doesn't fit. But I will tell you that we already know the funding doesn't really fit any of these models right now, and the statutes don't fit and the regs don't fit. So I think we're trying to explore any and all options and welcome your suggestions. I would encourage you, as you bring forth suggestions, that you think of in the context of not only for your individual district, but how it works across all our districts, because that is the biggest challenge whenever we start talking about funding, is how do we do it so that we do it for all instead of just one. So we are having those conversations, don't have solutions just yet.
All right. The next question is going, I can't remember where I was on that one, but I think the question was, if we do alternating days for students, how do we count that? NTI for every other day? No, I think I already asked that question. Sorry, I didn't mark that one. Or is there a max of NTI in this scenario? And the question was, these scenarios are being worked out and no decisions have been made yet. Has anyone seen go ahead.
I would just add, and so to summarize both of those questions, we know that next year, particularly next semester, is going to be a very unusual year. We're all on the same page in that we want to educate all kids. We don't want any kids sitting at home because they're scared, or their family is scared, or their family has compromising health conditions and not receiving an education because of that. That fear may be very well founded. And so we want to be as innovative as we can, knowing the legislature doesn't meet till January, but knowing we're likely to still be under emergency order. We want to try, and that's what Robin was describing. We're having these discussions to see how we can work through the process to enable you to fulfill these plans.
Okay. The next question that was left over from last time, has anyone seen the child care recommendations from the governor when they are allowed to open back up in June? This impacts districts that offer a child care program. The answer is guidance is currently being drafted and will be released soon. Okay, the next question is, when will school districts be informed of their CARES Act funds? 633F as in Frank /613 F as in Frank award amounts. The answer is district allocations were posted on May 15th. They may be found on our COVID page, and there's also a link that we will provide that is also provided that we can send to you. You mentioned in the beginning of last week's webcast that there would be a lot of flexibility during this time, including waiving legislative requirements. What are some of the requirements that could possibly be waived? The answer to that question is the Kentucky Board of Education has taken action to waive previous provisions of multiple administrative regulations. Furthermore, the board or the Department of Ed relied upon an executive order to waive statutes requiring in-person civics tests for graduation and EOC tests for certain early graduates. These are things that took place during this previous school year, and if your district has a specific waiver request, you can submit the request to the Department of Education. Will there be a summer feeding program or flexibility with breakfast and lunch for those on the virtual program who cannot come to school for health reasons themselves or with family? This scenario where school is in session, but some students are attending virtually due to health concerns, might be resolved in a few different ways, with some requiring waivers for operation. The intention of state agency and USDA would be to provide meals for all students, but the particular child nutrition program to be used is hard to determine at this time. Here are some potential solutions and requirements. SFSP utilized for homebound students. This would require waiver approval to use if NSLP is being served at the schools. Number 2, NSLP provided for homebound students. This would require waiver approval as well. Number 3, CACFP at risk. Meals could be provided after school day is over, but this would not be breakfast or lunch, but rather supper meals. The other question is how to count days and hours if we have alternating days with half students. Teachers would still count each day as one. The answer is teachers would get credit for each day, even if they had half the kids. The alternating days scenario posted was never contemplated by the current system. Exactly how alternating days would work in practice is being researched by the Department of Education.
And Tony, related to all of this, and this again is, related to some students coming in, some students not, and that could be for their own fear or compromised health condition, or it could be because when we get public health guidance, and there will be public health guidance coming talking about social distancing in a school facility, maybe you have to have an alternative calendar to reduce the number of people in your building, all of those scenarios. But I do want to point out that in the school district that talked about the plan for addressing whether or not, and trying to figure out how many students would not feel comfortable coming back into the building, even if the building was open, that district will be conducting a survey this summer to see exactly how many families feel that way. And I think that was a very good idea for other districts to try in some form or fashion reach out to your families the best you can to see if, given various scenarios, if you would have a population of students that would refrain from attending at all based on any of these conditions.
Okay. There was also questions about the gear and CARES money. And again, I think we just went over those in this webcast, so I am not going to repeat these questions, especially since these have links to them. And we can share those in a follow-up email with you all. The next question is, do you have additional information on the funds related to the Volkswagen? Will each district be allocated funds, or are there specific requirements for eligibility? This settlement is administered by the Energy and Environment Cabinet. House Bill 352, effective July 1, 2020, allocates $8.5 million to reimburse districts up to 50% of replacement costs for up to 5 buses with years of 2001 or older. See EEC's website for more information. Do you have any additional information on Senate Bill 1 funding, the money that was in the state budget for safety facilities funding and mental health personnel funding? House Bill 352, which is the budget, provides $18.2 million in bonding authority to the Department of Education for district facility security upgrades. House Bill 352 becomes effective on July 1, 2020. The department will make additional information available in advance of funding availability. Another question or a thought that they had provided was something to keep in mind. Alternate school calendars could impose some concerns with the timing of each district's payroll schedule, voluntary benefit withholdings, etc. That's something that we will have to keep working through. And our response is that KDE is currently researching various alternate school calendar models for workability and viability, and we will continue to provide districts with guidance and assistance as we work through these issues together. The question is, which Title I's funds formula will be used, fiscal year 19 or fiscal year 20? State education agencies must allocate 90% of their ESSER funds to local education agencies in proportion to the amount of fiscal year 2019 funds the LEA received under Title I, Part A of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And then the last question from last week was, if we submit an NTI application early, will someone at KDE let us know if it is acceptable prior to getting board approval? The answer is, if you would like your NTI application reviewed, you need to name the final draft and inform us in your email submission that you would like to have it reviewed. So that wraps up the questions that we had that we were not able to answer last week. And now I will, if you want to add a few comments while I pull up this week's questions, that would be great.
I do have something came in over my text. We have a comment from a superintendent about concerns related to the use of PPE or face masks in schools, especially at the high school level. And we do anticipate that the public health guidance will require the use of PPE next semester, at least initially, and possibly on throughout the semester. And then the comment was about it being hard to identify who is behind the mask and worried about safety. So I'm going to ask our friend John Akers. John, you don't have to answer that right now, but John's and his shop over at the Kentucky Center for School Safety have been really helping us run down some of these very, very specific issues that affect school safety and could have unintended consequences. So John, if you would add that to your list, I think that is a great, it's a safety issue, obviously dealing with PPE. And Jennifer, if you could flag that. I can't see whether John's on or not. Just in case he's not on, let's follow up with him by email.
We can move to this week's questions. Some of these were repeats from questions that I just answered from last week. So I will go ahead and move on to questions that have not been asked. The first one is, are board meetings permitted to take place if you limit to 10 and you do live stream?
I think that's related to the previous question. I'll defer to Todd. I don't know that the AG, I know they've issued an initial opinion that affected the virtual attendance and not having a meeting room. I'm sure they probably haven't weighed in on that specific question. Todd?
Tony, will you repeat that question again?
Yeah, they were wanting to know if the board meetings are permitted to take place in person, if they limit it to 10 people and do a live stream.
So I believe, and obviously they should check with their board counsel, but I don't believe they're prohibited from doing a live or an in-person meeting at this point in time. However, if they're going to do an in-person meeting, they should be coordinating with their local public health department to ensure that they're meeting all of the requirements for social distancing, PPE is available, things of that nature. As far as virtual meetings go, the Attorney General's office has provided an opinion that indicates we are able to, all state agencies, including school boards, are able to conduct their public meetings via virtual means, just as the Kentucky Board of Education is doing in this situation. The statute related to that has always been interpreted to indicate that the primary location, the main physical location, should be open to the public for them to come in and participate or at least view the meeting. But however, the Attorney General's opinion indicated that during this state of emergency, it's not feasible to open buildings to the public for them to come in. So in lieu of doing that some type of either live stream, television broadcast, radio broadcast should be provided for the public to listen in and see what's happening in the meetings.
Okay. Can the Department of Education share its, quote, healthy at work plan as an example or model to be utilized or modified at a district level?
Tony, if you'd like, I'll take that one.
Okay.
This is Robin Kinney. Part of my responsibilities in the Office of Finance and Operations is not only to help service local school districts, but my office also supports the activities and functions at the department. The department has received Healthy at Work guidance from the governor and from the personnel cabinet here in state government. It came to all state government agencies, and we're happy to share that with local school districts so they can see what advice has been given to us as a executive branch government agency. Of course, just like just like our districts, we're going to have to modify or enhance the department's plan, because we need to operate a little differently from those guidelines for our area technology centers, and also for the Kentucky School for the Deaf and Kentucky School for the Blind, which are both residential facilities. So in addition to the good guidance that we've already received from as a state government agency, we'll also be kind of modifying those, especially for those areas of our department that have students involved. So we're happy to share that, and we will post that on the COVID-19 website.
All right. The next one is, it has been recommended that a hybrid model allow in-person instruction for students with disabilities and those below grade level, while all other students remain in remote learning. Is this an inequity issue? And we don't want legal problems.
Thanks, Tony. I'll jump in on this, and Todd may also want to say something, but yeah, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about equity and access for students with disabilities. As you think through these plans, we want to ensure that students with disabilities are afforded the same opportunities, and as with all students, right? So in order to avoid any discriminatory types of practices or inadvertently engage in exclusionary practices, I would strongly recommend that districts not take the approach that because a student has a disability, then he or she must come to school face-to-face, or because a student has a disability, then he or she must engage in remote learning. If those decisions are made due to a student's unique needs, then that should be done through the ARC committee, and the ARC should determine what the least restrictive environment is for a student. Excluding on the basis of a disability would be a really bad idea.
And this is Todd. I agree with Greta on that. Her point is a good one. The district should look at what its plans are for all students, and then it will need to look at students with disabilities each individually, not as a whole, to the extent they need exceptions from what all students will be doing.
Okay.
I would add.
Oh, go ahead.
Going back to the comment about the face mask, and we do have obviously a partnership with the Department of Public Health, and we have somebody participating with us, and the guidelines that will be forthcoming from Public Health, we're told, will definitely include masks for schools in the fall. Cloth masks, of course, will be allowed, and those are the ones obviously that are easier to obtain or make. And the suggestion from Public Health perspective would be to suggest mandatory picture IDs for all students for security purposes. I think many high schools already have those. And so we will, Emily may have John Akers from Center for School Safety discuss with you so we can make sure our guidance from each agency is consistent. So thank you for that.
Okay. Well, this might be a good leeway into our next question, which mentions public health. So not to put you on the spot there, Emily, but in consultation with public health, what guidance do they provide if schools reopen and have a student test positive? Does that mean the whole school then quarantines?
It's probably safe to say we will have an answer for that from Public Health. I don't want to put Emily on the spot because I know that's probably an answer that is very fact specific and detailed. That is a great question. I've also received that question offline from some superintendents. I know Emily and others from Public Health, if you haven't already flagged that, I'm sure you have. That's something that we'll need guidance on in the future. And right now is a good time to go ahead and just announce next week we're going to devote a large part of the webcast to folks from Public Health. I think Dr. White and others will be with us. You all remember Dr. White was on one of the first webcasts that we had in that early March meeting when this was all starting. because we anticipate public health will be issuing some of their guidance related to schools this week. And so they'll be there with us on the webcast next week to discuss.
And you can go ahead and send questions in advance of our call next Tuesday. And of course, it'll be the same time, same place from 2 to 4 next Tuesday, where those officials from DPH will be available. And I'm sorry, Robin, were you going to say something?
No, you captured it. Thank you.
Okay, gotcha.
Can you all hear me?
We can.
This is Emily Messerly from the Kentucky Department for Public Health. I'm happy to answer that question to allay the fears about the whole school being quarantined. So, if any of you have experienced a pertussis outbreak in your school, then the way the Public Health Department will handle that with the contact tracing will be very similar. Only people who have been in direct contact with that student would be restricted from school or quarantined.
Okay.
Thank you, Emily. We had a little bit of audio difficulty. I think everybody could hear her. That actually leads into another comment, and I'll repeat what she said, is that it would be similar to a pertussis outbreak, meaning public health would use contact tracing, so you would only isolate those that had contact with the student. We obviously can give you more details next week on that. And we'll just go ahead and announce the governor has requested that the superintendents attend a short Zoom call on Thursday at 1:30, and that's actually going to be discussing issues around contact tracing in your communities. And I'll announce that information again at the end of the webcast, and of course we'll be providing you a meeting invite.
All right, the next question is, will funding related to transportation, food service, be addressed in a timely manner? These items could have significant financial impact, and information is needed for decision making.
I think when you say in a timely manner, ideally we would have the answer to those questions today. But we do understand and we appreciate, because we know that school districts have just been through an exercise trying to figure out what was the best data or the best choice for them, either using the 1819 or 1920 data. And part of that consideration was about surrounding growth and transportation. So we understand that those are really important pieces for you all to make decisions off of, as well as food service. Of course, food service is really much directed at this point in time about meals times rates, and that is based upon the USDA's method of reimbursing districts. We have been having conversations in that regard about whether, and we've had it at both our regional office level as well as the national level, about whether it is time to think about a higher rate or some other manner in which districts could receive additional funds due to a less than traditional way of delivering your meals. You also have additional costs, whether it's additional costs associated with the types of food that you're serving, if it's about how you're transporting those meals to students, if you still have to continue to do that in some way, shape, or form. The packaging, if you're just walking through the cafeteria line, you don't have to make sure that you have either sacks to put the food in or containers and transport coolers. So all those things are important considerations. As I said earlier, we are discussing all those things that impact local school districts and welcome your comments on a way to address those funding concerns.
Okay. Our next question is, when do we expect flexibility in current legislation to allow for alternate models? For example, more NTI days for the 2021 school year?
Well, unless the governor calls in the General Assembly for a special session, the General Assembly will not be meeting until January of 2021. There is flexibility. Of course, the state board has flexibility and the authority under statute to waive the state board's administrative regulations. And then there's some authority that the governor possesses under the Emergency Powers Act, or emergency powers that he has, that, for example, we utilized for, I believe it was the civics test. And so we will be looking at those avenues to try to get where we need to be before, if the General Assembly is not called in and can act, if we need that type of relief in the fall.
Okay.
Todd, do you want to, or Tracy, anything I left out of that?
No, I think that's where we're at.
Agree, that is the case. While the state board has a lot of flexibility in its ability to waive administrative regulations, those administrative regulations are frequently derivative of statutes that are put in place by the General Assembly, and we have less ability to just grant waivers for those. That requires some more work, either the General Assembly coming into session, as Commissioner Brown indicated, or working with the governor's office on his executive authority in the state of emergency to waive those statutes.
The next question, there apparently is a letter that has been sent out by Senator Wise through several channels that they've received, and it seems to suggest that they should not open until August 24th. And they just wanted to know if that's their understanding, and if they want options to go to school fewer days next year if needed.
I'll generally describe the letter that's being referenced, and then I'll let Todd or David Cook explain the details. Senator Wise issued a letter to me and others reminding us of the bill that was passed in 2017. I believe it was sponsored by Senator Thayer, that it's been called the boat dock bill, and it was designed, there was a discussion, and there's always been a discussion about various employers in the summer. Often they want more consistency when school calendars begin and end, just because of the employment that they utilize from student workers at these facilities. And generally they're summer type boat docks or water parks, those types of things. And so that bill was a result of that. It was a compromise, and it was gave districts a lot of kind of incentive that if you started school after August 24th or 26th, I forget the date, then you got certain incentives in your calendar for those purposes. So Todd and David, you want to explain that? And that the letter from Senator Wise, as I interpret it, is a reminder to districts that exists. And it exists, and it might provide districts some benefit that they may not have or forgotten about if they were to begin school after that late in August.
I agree, Kevin. I believe that the letter was reminding districts of that option that exists in law already, but I don't read it to suggest that districts should utilize that. I think those determinations are made at the local level by the local school board based on whatever is best for those individual communities.
And Tracy confirms that date is August 26th.
Okay. All right, moving on to our next question. We would like, when they say they're looking at two models, weekly alternating AB model, half face-to-face while the other works on PBL at home. If granted, unlimited NTI, a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday NTI model, half the students coming in on Thursday with the other half on Friday. Would they be on the right track with that model?
Tony, say that again.
Weekly alternating A and B model, half face-to-face while the other half works on PBL at home, if granted unlimited NTI. And Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday NTI model with half the students coming in on Thursday, the other half coming in on Friday. And they want to know if they would be on the right track.
Well, if they're referencing being on the right track as, having fewer students in their building at one time, I would definitely say yes. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. They're going to have to take into consideration the number of students enrolled in each building, their bus routes, the number of buses that they have. So, I mean, alternate models is really thinking outside of the box. So I don't think any one alternate model is wrong or incorrect as we kind of think about moving forward. It's going to have to be what best works for the district, their students, and their families.
And I think some of this will become more clear after next week's call with public health, based on the guidance we anticipate they will issue this week. That will give a little bit more specifics on the social distancing requirements that schools are going to need to meet. Maybe you have a school that already has some extra classrooms that you could spread folks out, and it may not be as much of an issue as another school that does not. And then that school may have to actually, to achieve social distancing, you may actually have to go to an alternative model. So there are going to be all kinds of combinations depending on the footprints of your buildings, the square footage, the layouts, all of those things.
Okay. There is a question about if they can hire additional certified staff members to teach their medically fragile students virtually, if there would be a waiver of specific certifications so that they can utilize teachers who may not be certified in a specific subject area. Do you follow, or do I need to repeat that one?
Could you repeat the question, Tony?
Sure. We may have to hire additional certified staff members to teach our medically fragile students virtually. Will there be a waiver of specific certifications so that we can utilize teachers who may not be certified in a specific subject area?
So I think this question is aimed at teacher certification waivers. So Sylvia Starkey may want to weigh in. But if I'm understanding the first part of it correctly, I think the first conversation that we would want to have with the district would be around medically fragile students and their least restrictive environment, because it may be that it's not necessarily that all medically fragile students are on remote instruction. Again, that's a case-by-case situation in which the ARC needs to weigh in on what the best environment for the student is. And with regard to waivers, there's a process in OCL for submitting those waivers and then moving those forward. I don't know if Sylvia wants to say anything about that or not.
Yeah, they're called program teacher assignment waivers. So if you anticipate that would happen, then you would need to submit the program teacher assignment waiver and go through that approval process.
Okay. All right. The next question is, we have a follow-up question to Comp Ed. What funds should a local district use to pay for Comp Ed services due to the current circumstances?
So this is one of those situations, and I think we have received some questions from districts around the use of CARES funds and GEARS funds. And or the general fund or IDEA dollars for the use of compensatory education. And while those additional funds are, can be used for compensatory education, I think it's very important for districts to weigh out their maintenance of effort requirements under the IDEA. And I think that there's some finance people from OCL on the line, either Chris Thacker or Jonathan Compton or Carla Miller, or any of you on to weigh in with some additional comments around the MOE requirements.
Yeah, this is Chris Thacker. With regard to the use of funds, it's something that districts would need to think about consciously, because the U.S. Department of Education has indicated that they're not going to request any waivers to the IDEA, which would include the IDEA's maintenance of effort requirements. And since we've missed, as far as being in actual schools, quite a number of days this year, I suspect there might be a reduction in the amount of state and local funds local districts may have spent this year providing special education and related services, which could put you in jeopardy of failing to meet maintenance of effort. So it might be in your best interest to examine where you are in your expenditure of those funds, and it may be a priority to spend state and local funds for this purpose so that you don't get in a non-compliance and potential payback issue with regards to maintenance of effort requirements of the IDEA.
Okay. The next question that we have is, can we utilize performance-based credit for attendance at the elementary level? Is anybody online that can answer that one, or should I mark that one?
Let's
Tony,
mark
this is
that one.
Amanda. Yeah, I would, but can you read that one more time, please? I just want to make sure I heard it correctly. I may be able to answer it, and if not, we'll mark it.
Okay. Can we utilize performance-based credit for attendance at the elementary level?
For attendance. Okay. Yes, let's mark that. That's something we're still talking about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. No worries. Next question is going to be for Robin. Why was the ESSER distribution less than 83% of the Title I allocation?
So I think we talked about that briefly in the presentation. The 83%, there's been a little bit of confusion because some districts are looking at more than just the original allocation that was given to them by USED. And Charlie Harmon, I think Charlie's on the line. I might ask him to jump in and provide additional detail. But we want to make sure as you go out and look at the 83%, you're looking at the right number. And now we have the allocations themselves. So maybe Charlie can also give us a little more information on where to look for those. Charlie, are you on the line?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay.
So I just think the best, it's going to be district by district. The 3 or 4 districts that we've looked at, they were within 0.5% of what was projected. So you'll have to send me your information, and I'm getting some feedback. So it might be me or might be somebody else.
Sounds like someone's got a slow flow.
Okay. So if my email's on the contact sheet, if they'll send me a list, a request on who they are, I'd be more than happy to get back to them this afternoon.
Did we lose everybody, or is that just we were all muted?
I think we all got muted.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know if we did Charlie end up answering the question?
I think if I can repeat what I think I heard Charlie say is we can, if the individual requester is asking that question, can email either him or myself. We'll make sure that we get that answered for you about the 83%.
Okay.
It sounded like to me that Charlie was on his tractor, but I don't know.
I'm sitting in my office, nose to the grindstone.
All right. The next question, are school districts expected to provide PPE masks or PPE in parentheses masks for all students?
I think the Department for Public Health will address that more fully at Tuesday's call, but it is my understanding, at least based upon right now, that the expectation will be students will be wearing masks in the fall, based upon where we are right now.
Hey, Robin, this is Kate. To me, the question centers more around, will the districts have to provide the mask if it is required?
That's correct.
Okay.
Provide them.
So I think for planning purposes, I would approach it like you do other requirements for students and may make some accommodation for students who are on free and reduced lunch and the ability of a student to cover the 4 or 5 masks that might be needed to get through the school week. So just think about things like that. The other thing that I think you should plan for is the contingency for when a student presents without a mask, even though they may, have a mask most times, they forget it when they came to school this day and they forgot the mask. What will your contingency plan be for that? So just some things to think about.
Okay. All right. So this is a direct question to one of our guiding questions in the document. What if the answer to the question, how can social distancing be accomplished for students who require one-to-one assistance and supervision, is that it cannot be accomplished? What are we supposed to do then? So the question is they're saying that they cannot accomplish social distancing for those students who require one-to-one assistance, is how I read this. And then what are they supposed to do in that situation?
Yeah, we're going to defer that question to next week's webcast when we have public health on there, officially on there, and Emily will take that down. I know they've already considered that scenario based on their conversations with Kay and others, but we will cover that next week.
Okay. This next one, I believe, is going to be for Greta. It has to do with an ARC. So if the ARC determines that the student is eligible for comp ed services, but the parent does not want the student to receive those, is there a particular way that should be documented beyond the conference summary notes?
I think the conference summary will be sufficient. A couple of things to think about as you're having those conversations during that ARC meeting around compensatory education is, the district should document all that it is offering and everything that the student is entitled to, including the transportation to and from, and considering that, compensatory education is the remedy for failing to provide FAPE. However, it happens all the time that districts say, these are the amount of services that we need to provide, and parents and students, for whatever reason, decline that. And that's the same situation as, districts have to provide FAPE and make it available. Parents can decline. Parents can decline all special education services if they so choose. And so, I would advise the district to document all of the efforts, include that in the conference summary, and then document that the parents or guardians don't want it. And I would capture any concerns that the parent may share around the delivery of comp ed and try to work through any of those challenges.
The next question we have is, what about this? This is going to be a dual credit. So David Horstman, what about students who are not well, I guess maybe it was not, sorry about that. What about students who are not in dual credit courses who couldn't take their industry certificates, but not in ATC programs that were in their high school? What are they supposed to do? Or what are we supposed to do for those students?
Well, I think if we're talking about CTE courses that are taught at a comprehensive high school rather than a center, the same guidance would apply in those labs that we're using in the other labs. Obviously, admission into buildings is going to be a district decision along with Department of Public Health.
And as was stated earlier by David, the KCTCS graciously offered to allow the high school dual credit students into their labs during the month of June. And they're going to be opening up, I believe, 16 of their campuses. We're going to learn a lot from them as they open up those campuses based on the public health requirements on how to do that and all the protocols. And so we're really going to be obviously working with them, and we're going to utilize and copy those same efforts as we may need to do the same in some of our centers on into July. So we'll be learning from them, and that will help both districts and the department as we need to go in for these purposes over the summer.
Okay. A question that I think that we probably will have to take in consideration with public health is, or maybe not, is do we have any recourse when students refuse to wear masks or parents refuse to wear masks for school-sponsored events?
That may be the most popular question that we have to deal with next year. I only hope that we start seeing some masks that are acceptable, that also are popular with students, whether they have, for elementary kids, cartoon characters or whatever they may be. Maybe that might be the key. But I think that is something that obviously that's a school. It's not only a public health issue, but could result in a conduct disciplinary issue. But then we also have to be mindful there will be some students that could have some health issues that districts will need to work with their local health department as to whether or not a mask would be something that is appropriate for them.
Okay. This is going to be another one, I believe, for OSEL in Greta's shop. What will compensatory education or compensatory education look like for students, particularly those with severe disabilities who already spend much of the day in an MSD resource classroom setting, things such as after school hours, summer months, etc.?
So compensatory education in and of itself must occur outside of the regular education day because it's in addition to what's already being offered, simply because it is really the provision of the previously denied FAPE. So it really doesn't matter if a student's in an MSD classroom or if a student's in a full collaborative setting for a mild disability. It still must occur outside of the regular day. The provision of compensatory education must occur or must be planned and designed by the ARC. So again, that's a unique individual decision based on each student's needs and based on what denial of FAPE occurred.
Okay. The next question is KDE communicating with our post-secondary institutions about student teaching and what that might look like this school year, depending on what model a district implements?
Yeah, hi, this is Rob. I'm happy to take this one. Met with the public deans yesterday and had a long conversation around what field placements are going to look like. And we're getting a variety of input from post-secondary, and we're kind of seeing two different things. One, we understand, and districts, I hope you do too, that it's going to be critical to have student teachers participating in field placement, whether they are there on a blended model with the teacher and the students on the days that they're in, and hopefully participating with NTI if you're having to have an NTI day. We know that several districts allowed student teachers to continue to participate throughout NTI, and they were able to complete all 70 of their regulatory required days. Where we get into some concerns on the other side are some districts did not allow student teachers to participate in any way, shape, or form after they switched to NTI. So that's going to be a concern. We understand that there have been some districts who've said that they won't host any field placement students. The observation field hours, the 200 hours that students have to get before they're admitted to a prep program, our education prep providers are trying to develop some virtual options so that they can gain some of that instruction. We want to work with our districts and our EPPs to see if we are in more of a virtual or a blended learning environment, if we might be able to stream some classrooms so that students can participate that way. But as far as student teaching goes, we're going to have to really work closely with the districts to determine how we can help support our EPPs and keeping that teacher pipeline open. And I would imagine that as you all are reopening and contemplating how to deal with COVID slide, having an extra adult who's training to be a teacher might not be a bad thing to have for support at a really good price for you in your classrooms.
Okay. Going on to the next question. This is going to be related to ADM. They're wanting to know if the Department of Ed can provide districts ADM funding numbers versus ADA for comparisons.
I want to, before Robin answers that, I just want to caution everybody, the average daily membership discussion has been around for a long time. We know both the benefits, or we talked about over the time, the benefits and the negatives, and whether or not the state budget could even handle such a thing. Obviously, a shift to ADM would be a legislative decision if we went to that overall. I think when Robin was talking about membership, we're talking about a stopgap measure we may need to use in the fall if we are trying to help you fund these hybrid models so that we educate kids that need to have a public education, but because of the virus, either because of social distancing, we have to educate some of them at home a few days a week, or because, as we stated earlier, there could be a percentage of your students that don't want to be in the school environment because of their own health condition, or they live with somebody with a compromised condition. And if that type of scenario comes to fruition, that's when we're talking about, well, how can we think creatively using the waiver authority of the board and or the authority given to the governor under an emergency as a stopgap measure to get funds to you to take care of that, because the current statutes don't contemplate that. This would not be a wholesale shift in light of the General Assembly taking action to change to ADM. So I just want to make sure we understand when we mention ADM, we're talking about a stopgap emergency type measure for next fall. And that was just an idea that was thrown out. Robin, is that accurate?
That's exactly right. And I think as we think about even the stopgap measures that were taken at the end of this school year, it was just that. The General Assembly is the legislative body that makes the law and provides funding. And so we are trying to just make sure that we examine any and all possibilities moving forward, but ultimately, it will likely be their decision on how we move forward. And I think we were acting, even though it all seems still very hurried, and we're trying to react very quickly, we do have a little bit of time. And I know districts should have already, in a regular school year, you would have already had all this planned out. But we do have to be thoughtful about how we proceed. We are always worried about unintended consequences, especially when we're talking about something that really has to fit 172 school districts.
Okay. All right, we are going back up. Looks like we're getting to the end of the questions for the day. They're saying that if ADM is not an option, then would ADA from 1920 be used again?
And that is a decision that the General Assembly could make in time for that to come to fruition, because they will be in session for their normal session in January of 2021. Correct, Robin?
Yes, we've actually talked about whether, in terms of predictability, one option could be, now that districts have been through the exercise of looking at their 18-19 data and their 19-20 data, could one option be just carrying forward that another year? Of course, that impacts districts with growth. So if you have growth in the upcoming school year, how do you handle that? So really, we have to think a whole year ahead as we try to plan and predict what's going to happen this year. But that is one option of many options that we're still thinking about.
Okay. All right. Well, that wraps up the questions that I see here. There was another question about the ESSER distribution appearing to be around 81.4% instead of 83%. I believe this has been clarified already. I don't know if there's any more to that you want to provide clarification on, or that we can clarify.
I would again encourage that district to reach out and talk to Charlie Harmon and he can walk them through the process of their original Title I allocation and how we came up with the 83%. The 83% was also guidance that was given to us early on by USED as we were receiving those funds.
Hey, Robin.
Yes, Charlie.
I'll say one thing that might help if somebody who's really into the Title I numbers. The way we came up with 83 is at the statewide level, and we said 83 at the statewide level. So it would be a blip on the radar if somebody got exactly 83, because some districts may get 84. It's based on a number, and the statewide funding number was 83%. So each district is a little bit different underneath that.
Okay. Well, it is 3:56 p.m. and we're going to wrap that up. I think Kevin had a couple of closing remarks he wanted to make. I again wanted to remind everybody to make sure that you tune in to our special tribute to our class of 2020. Again, this is something that we have produced independently in the Department of Communications at Department of Ed with help from the Kentucky Workforce and Education Development Cabinet. It's going to include more than 1,500 photos of our seniors, our graduating class of 2020. Also special musical tributes that were sent to us by Kentucky artist J.D. Shelburne, Lincoln Bridge, and also some commencement addresses and speeches by a number of people. And I think it's going to be truly special. It'll be streamed on our YouTube channel, and you can check all your emails and our social media to get a link to that information. And with that, I'll hand this over to the commissioner.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Tony, in advance and team of putting that together. I think we all need a little break on Saturday night around 7. It always does me good to just watch see some pictures on social media of students, and that will be the case Saturday night. So, and of course, it will be archived if you're unable to watch it, and you'll be able to see it. Feel free to share the link to your communities and your constituencies. And then also, as I mentioned, in the middle of the webcast, you will be getting an invitation from my office, but it will be a Zoom call with the governor and some individuals that he will have on there from public health, I believe, to talk about social tracing as it gets going in your communities, and wanted to reach out to the superintendents as leaders in your communities for that. That will be on Thursday at 1:30 Eastern time. And then, of course, we'll be back next week for another superintendent webcast at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and a large portion of that webcast will be focused on the discussions with the Department of Public Health and the guidance that we anticipate that they will be issuing at that time, if not before then, related to operation of schools during the COVID-19 era. So thank you all for what you're doing, and also all of our partner organizations that are participating on this call and the education co-ops. Thanks, and have a great rest of the week.